So we're on chapter 4, at the bottom of page 6, Ayin Beis, and we're in the process of discussing the analogy as it is in the human physiology, human structure, the structure of faculties as the energy and containers are tailored toward each other, affect each other, are shaped, and together in a symbiotic fashion become the way any particular faculty functions. And that's because they're fundamentally what we call pnimi, internalized, integrated faculties. So we begin with an amorphous soul, a soul that has no shape and form, indivisible, not a composite of pieces. And this shape and form, this energy, contains potential, which in turn will become the potential for different faculties, wisdom, kindness, love, and so on. That in turn will evolve, metamorphosis, a process, until they'll finally enter and join a container, whether it's the power of vision in the eye, or the power of hearing in the ears, or the power of intelligence in the brain, and then we'll begin to function as such. Okay. So now we continue chapter 4, where he concludes this analogy and then applies it to our lives. The end of chapter, the end of page 6, bottom of page 6. And this is why the faculties themselves manifest in a defined and finite fashion will be schalkus, and in a separate way, meaning in a diverse way, separately one from another. As we discussed in the previous chapter, he discussed that they're fundamentally different. Both how each container is unique and distinct from another. And that's why you see different levels of how the soul manifests, whether it's in the mind, or it's in the other parts of the body, or in the legs. And also, as he defined that diversity and distinction in how the faculties interact with each other. The faculty themselves come into a form of a defined and distinct form, like the faculty of intelligence, of the mind, seichel. It does not manifest in a seamless way, pshitus as in having no inflections and no defined structure. Pshitus means seamless. It doesn't come in a undefined, just raw or as I said, amorphous, undefined energy, just energy. And in a level of infinite or no limits. That's the contrary. Pshitus is the opposite of ischalkus. Pshitus means seamlessness, ischalkus means distinctions. Bligvul is no end, and gvul is hagbola. Hagbola is defined. So the faculties, like let's say the faculty of intelligence, doesn't come in a seamless, a non-distinct way. It's very distinct, and it is very defined and finite. The chol eir seichel harihu murgish b'hagbola. Every intelligent light or energy, every form of intelligence, really, eir seichel meaning the light and the energy of intelligence, comes in is sensed and felt and experienced in a very defined way, Not like willpower, not like will or desire. That the way it comes out, the way it's revealed, it manifests and extends without any limits. When you say somebody's will, my desire, that does not have any parameters. The desire may have a desire to eat, a desire to walk, but desire, by definition, is a very general, non-distinct force, makif, as you said earlier. Whereas seichel, whereas the energy of intelligence, that comes in a defined way. And now he's going to explain what this definition is. So he's concluding and summing up this whole picture of pnimi, the defined and confined energy that is integrated and internalized fundamentally, as we said, be'etzem, fundamentally internalized. He's explaining it now in the context of that it manifests in a very defined and distinct way. And several elements to this. He's going to explain several elements to this distinction and this definition. Levad mashu be'eze pradover, besides the fact that the intelligence is in a specific matter. Let's say you're conceiving of an idea about how to build a home. You're conceiving an idea how to run your business. You're conceiving an idea how to get out of a difficult situation. You're conceiving of an idea of how to communicate a concept to your students. Whatever it is, it all has pradover. Just by definition, the conceiving of an idea is already a distinct something that you're thinking about. What is the seichel? What is the intelligence that is? What is the definition of the intelligence? Shechenu gam beratzon. Now he's qualifying and saying the fact is this is also with desire and will. That you also have a will that is defined by what you want and what you desire. But as he's going to go on, will, that's where it stops, the similarity. Will and desire also can have a distinct manifestation. So he's being very thorough. So he's saying, so intelligence, besides that comes by Kabbalah, it comes in a defined and distinct way. Besides the fact that it's in a specific area, so it's not just the subject matter or the object of your desire in Ratzon, or the subject matter that you're conceiving of. Not only is that defined, but the actual revelation, the actual manifestation of the energy and of the revelation of the idea is also a limited energy. Because even an intelligent idea, even an intelligent energy, he calls it seichel. I mean, it sounds a little weird, intelligent energy, but I use that expression because that's really the definition. Is energy and seichel is intelligence. It really means the force of intelligence, basically, the power of intelligence. But he's using because we're talking here energy versus container. So it's the energy of intelligence, the light of intelligence. So even shababa avshota, even an intelligence, an energy of intelligence that comes in, that's very abstract. That's abstract. She'ein nitfus kol kach be'esis, that is not really confined, defined, and graspable in words, in letters, esis. In letters, in other words, in distinct letters. Even such an intelligence is also a finite energy. Obviously, an intelligence that manifests in words and in letters, that in other words has a very distinct description, is clearly defined. But he's saying even an abstract idea also has definition. I'm sorry, I just reread the same thing. So even an abstract idea also that does not have letters also comes in, is also a defined energy. And this is a definition that is in its essential nature. It's not a superimposed detail. That intelligence fundamentally is essentially infinite, endless. And it happens to be dressed up in a container. No. Intelligence, by definition, its energy is a finite one, even when you're thinking about abstract ideas. And it's also defined and limited in its extension. So not only is its personality, is its nature defined, but it's also defined in how far it extends, how far it manifests. The ad patove, that it comes till here and not further. In other words, there are parameters that define the idea. The kol seichel amiti, because every true intelligence, every true seichel, yesh bo hagbala kama yachol ispashet, has a parameter, has a definition, has a limit of how much it can spread, how much it can extend. Umishu chacham gadol, and someone who's a very smart man, smart person, shemevin ha'inyan l'omke, Yosef, who understands and comprehends the subject more in depth, yuchel lispashet by Yosef. His intelligence can extend increasingly more. But nevertheless, hakolu b'agbala. It's always with a finite parameter. Even in other words, even somebody who can conceive of a very smart person. And that is because the reason for that is because it is fundamentally an internal energy, and that's why it comes in parameters. It has parameters, and it also comes in a form of distinction. Because every intelligent idea has different details, has several details. Because an intelligent idea cannot exist without details. And every detail is not similar of how the energy of your intelligence radiates there. And that there's an inner dimension to the idea. An external dimension. In one detail of this idea, the seichel, intelligence, can radiate more. That's the inner and depth of the idea. And another detail, and another detail may not have from that energy of the intelligence in such an internal way. So think of an idea that has many aspects to it. So first of all, idea, what he's saying here, so far what he said, let me just sum up. He says, in addition to the fact that conceiving intelligence requires some parameters, simply what are you thinking about? You're thinking about something that's detailed, that has some, what is it about? You're thinking about the properties of the sun. You're thinking about what your food you're eating. You're thinking about how you're going to walk. You're thinking about a plan you're making. That itself, but that's what you're thinking about has details. What he's saying now, even the process of ideas is defined. So what he's saying is that a few things that he's saying. Number one, in addition to what I just said, that has a definition, what you're thinking about, is that the seichel itself, number one, is a fundamentally defined structure. It has an amount, it's defined by its personality, its identity is a defined one. It's defined by how much it can extend. In other words, an intelligent idea doesn't extend infinitely. It has a place, it has parameters where how far it goes, and even a person with depth, the idea is going to have its limits, its parameters. And also the idea itself is made up of many details. Again, not what you're thinking about, just the fact that you understand in the concept. Comprehension is made up of details, and different details have different amount of intelligence manifested in it. So you may have a detailed plan. Not every detail has all the intelligence. Some details are extremely important. Others may be less critical. So each detail has its own way of expressing the general concept and idea, the inner and outer aspects of the idea. The chen b'midas, that's intelligence. The same thing is with one's emotions. Emotions that are governed by intelligence. I'm not just talking about, in other words, wild, irresponsible, reckless feelings. We're talking about, structured emotions and feelings that are mature, regulated by the mind. They have many different ways that they diversify and they separate and are distinct in the way that the energy of emotions extends each and every detail of it. Like love that is a result of a thoughtful process, a love that follows intelligence, a love that has a reason for it. You love something for a good reason. So it's basically, it's been tempered. It's seasoned. A love for something that comes after reflection with your mind. He's trying to say that it's been solidly thought through. How do you ba'agbola? It comes in some type of finite form, and it does not necessarily compel someone to die for it. Because his love for it is somewhat limited. So in other words, just because your mind has compelled you to feel you love something, it doesn't mean you're going to die for it. Which means you're going all the way, infinite. The love has limits. See what I'm saying? The love has limits. You may like something, you may love something, doesn't mean you're ready to do everything. So you can see that love itself has parameters and limits of how far you're going to go. Just like the intelligence before he described has limits how far you're going to go. Okay, let me stop here. Okay, so he's added now one final piece to the puzzle of how the energy that enters into the containers is fundamentally finite and distinct. Now he's going to explain this in a context of application to Torah mitzvahs of how we serve God. So he says, he's now going to explain what a mitzvah is. That in a mitzvah we have two aspects to it. One is we're fulfilling God's will. In general, all mitzvahs are equalized by that factor. And the second thing is that each mitzvah has its particular intention, particular function. Okay? This is what we find, that the intention that we do mitzvahs, there's distinction between one intention and another. The intention why we do different mitzvahs are not similar in all mitzvahs. Because the reason and the secret behind each mitzvah are not similar one to the other. Like, for example, you'll give the kavanah, the intention of giving charities to help somebody. The kavanah, making a blessing on food, is acknowledgement, thank you. So mitzvahs have different intentions, and because they're not all one equalizer. Each one has a distinct purpose. Now he asks the question. But we learn in the Pirkei Avot, we learn Amash Amar Azal Al Tehei Yeshu V'Shekel Mitzvah Shal Teira. And what it says in the Azal, our sages teach us that you shouldn't sit and measure the mitzvahs of the Torah. But you should feel that the Kalash Shebekalas, the most lenient of the lenient of mitzvahs, and the most Chamura Shebechamuras, the most severe of the severe and stringent of the mitzvahs, Kulam Shavim, are all equal. So a person shouldn't say, you know what, this mitzvah I'm going to do because it's easier to do. This one is harder, I'm not going to do it. A person shouldn't be doing that. He's going to explain here how there's two elements to mitzvahs. Like he just said, remember we just spoke about how the faculties are each one distinct in their own way. So he's applying it now to our lives. So a person shouldn't say that. Why? Because Zel Mitzad Harotzin Elyon, Because the mitzvahs come from the divine will, the higher divine will. Sheba mitzvahs, that's within the mitzvahs. And the will, God's will and desire to you to do mitzvahs does not have any finite parameters and distinction. He wants all of them to carry the same will. I want you to do this. So from that perspective, all the mitzvahs are equal. It would be like you have a team of people and saying, I want you to build a home for me. So one has to build, one is an electrician, one is a plumber, one is a contractor, one is a painter, etc. From the point of view, your desire, they have different jobs, but the desire is one. I want this building. Figure out how to do it. So the desire is a common denominator that equalizes them all. Okay. That's why you shouldn't be sitting and measuring. Someone will say, you know what? I think laying a brick is trivial. And it's only the people who laid the foundation, that's what matters. That's not correct. Every detail is absolutely necessary from that perspective, from the will perspective. So, all the mitzvahs are equal. But if you look at from the perspective of the reason and the intention of each mitzvah, that there's a difference. Like, for example, the reason that there's a plumber, there's a reason there's an electrician, the reason there's another worker, they have a distinct thing. If they're all going to say, you know what, from the perspective of the builder, he doesn't really care the details, everything is equal, we'll all do the same thing. You also won't have a job done. So functionality has to be distinct. But there's an element that someone can't say one thing is more important than the next. Okay? So we see in a mitzvah there's two elements. There's the common denominator, the common equalizer, that it's all the will of the divine. And there's the element how each mitzvah serves its particular function. So if you talk about the will, the desire within the mitzvahs, that's where they're all equal. If you talk about the reason and the intention, that's where there's a distinction. In general, this is the difference between Torah and mitzvahs. Torah, which is a study, manifests in many diverse details. Because all the inyanim, all the ideas, all the matters within Torah have distinctions based on the wisdom that's within those. The wisdom that's within. In Torah, when you study things, you study different things. Every part of Torah speaks about something else that's unique. Not only do the subject matter, all the subjects that are discussed in the Torah are distinct, but also the pleasure has different levels, distinct levels. And this is the meaning, this is what it means. The Inyan, when we study in the Talmud, the Talmud says that when the Jews stood at Sinai, every one of the 10 commandments was uttered by God, or all the different opinions by Moses. Each utterance of the 10 commandments, it says their souls expired. I'll call dibur v'dibur parcha nishmasim. On each one of the 10 commandments, each commandment, their souls parcha fluttered away, like a bird that flies away. And God had to make a special effort to bring them back. Why is that the case? The reason for that is the B'matan Torah here is God's satanic Shabbat. Because at Sinai, when they received the Torah, they felt the pleasure within Torah, within each detail. And each of the 10 commandments has its own distinct and unique pleasure. That's why on each utterance, each commandment, their souls expired. Because you could say, they heard the 10 commandments, Fine, it was a very high revelation. One time their soul should expire. Why in each utterance? Because there's distinction here. Remember that we were speaking about earlier, that every faculty has its distinct space. So same thing here, every mitzvah has its distinct thing. But Torah, he's saying, generally now, he's explaining now that generally speaking, mitzvahs have two parts. They have the kavanah, the intention is distinct, but the will of God is equal. Now he's saying Torah is, and mitzvahs is basically doing what God wants. Torah is understanding God's mind. So every detail has its own thing. So when they heard different utterances, each utterance had its own pleasure that it evoked, and therefore their soul expired, even though it expired a moment before for a different utterance. Okay? Okay, called dibur v'dibur. That's why, because in each one there's a unique and distinct pleasure. That's why in each one their souls expired. Like he explains in the Torah, that's from the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, in the discourse that begins from Shavuos. Was it Bamidbar? The Torah says, "And I will be for you an instrument, a tool." And in the second discourse, where he talks about Shabbos and Shalach, there he explains this point that he just said, that each one of the 10 commandments had its own particular pleasure, and therefore when they heard it, their souls expired. On the other hand, but mitzvahs, on the other hand, come from the divine, higher divine will, the supernal will, desire of God. Shebem kulam shavim. And from that perspective, all the mitzvahs are equal. So though there's distinct mitzvahs, but as he said before, don't sit and weigh one mitzvah against another, because there's an element that equalizes them all, and that's the will. So we're finding here in application purposes how what he spoke earlier about distinct faculties as opposed to the makif, the will, desire that is all encompassing, how it manifests in our work, in our serving God. Then he's going now another distinction. So similarly, we also find the difference between the responsibility, the obligation to study Torah, and the obligation to perform mitzvahs. So he's going to explain now. The bechiv deisik HaTorah yesh b'zeh madreges. In the responsibility to asik, to struggle, to study Torah, there are several levels. For example, so now he's moving over. After he said that Torah in general has every distinct element, that's why each phrase they heard, their souls expired. In mitzvahs, on the other hand, it's all God's will, so that's all about a certain equalizer. Now he's also saying in our responsibility of studying Torah and performing mitzvahs. That in the chiyuv the esek HaTorah, yesber madreges, in the study of Torah, we find levels. Responsibility is that you should pour over it day and night. You have a mitzvah, that you should pour over it, or a gisa, you should struggle, exert yourself day and night. That a person should always be studying Torah. However, this instruction is for scholars. It's for people who preoccupy themselves. And Yeshua literally means those that sit in the tents. Like it says about Jacob, that he sat in the tent and studied. So this directive that I just read is from, where is it? And now he's going to explain the distinctions. There's different levels of the responsibility that people have. But these distinctions okay. So you're saying, okay, fine, the responsibility to study Torah has levels. Even though it says that you should always be studying day and night, always, constantly, so what are you saying that there is a distinction? The answer is that is for scholars. But business people, their responsibility is one chapter in the morning, one chapter in the evening. They don't have the responsibility of studying all day. Okay? Now he's asking, well, you're saying that they only have a responsibility in morning and night. Razal, the sages tell us, your Torah should be permanent, and your work should be temporary. So you're seeing even people who are business people, it says clearly that the Torah should be a priority. So why are you saying that it's only during certain times and parameters? So the answer is that means that it should be permanent in your soul. It doesn't mean that you could actually be learning all the time. It means in your soul you have to know that even if you're working most of the day, the real soul nourishment, the real priority in your life should be the internal spiritual study and work that you're doing. Okay? Mm-hmm. The tachlis kavanah v'gam, because the ultimate purpose of every person is to study Torah. So in other words, even if most of the day is busy at work, you have to always know that what's really permanent in your life is the study, even if you're not studying all the time. And even while he's busy in business, in handling transactions and so on, even when he's involved in business, the kavanah in order for him to profit, so then it allows him the time, allows him the ability to study Torah, and to educate and guide his children in the study of Torah and the performance of mitzvahs. So in other words, he's saying that the study of Torah we see has parameters, and different people have different responsibilities, and even those that have to always know that it's permanent in your life Torah, but practically they're not doing it all the time. So they have to know that's the means and there's the end. That's the end of it all. This all is in the study of Torah. However, when someone performs mitzvahs, and this everybody's equal. Because everybody's responsible to do mitzvahs. So let's say putting on film, keeping Shabbos. That's equal. In study, there's a difference between a scholar and a business person. So even though the business person also should be a priority, but practically, he dedicates less time to it. Okay. When it comes to mitzvahs, everybody's equal. It's an equalizer. You don't say Shabbos is different for you than for me. You may internally, emotionally experience it differently, but the action is the same. The action is different. How much you study, when you study, and so on. On the other hand, Torah, which we're not everybody's equal, like the business people we mentioned. וגם בזה יש חילוקי מדרגות. וגם בזה יש חילוקי מדרגות, and even within this itself, there are many levels. וגם באסס פירוס השייכים לתורה, שייכות תורה לקרוא בקביעת הזמן. What he's adding now is okay. He's repeating. Commercial. They're all equal, like the business people, and this too has many levels. Because even scholars, ASIC, I'm sorry, even lay people that have a connection to Torah need to make it a permanent fixture, as I said, permanent in time, as a priority. He's making a distinction now, just qualifying something he said earlier. Before he distinguished between people who are business people and scholars. So he said, you see, business scholars learn all day, business people morning and night. So even though in spirit they have to always know it's a priority, but there's a means and an end. It's the end, it's not the means. The means is most of the things they're doing throughout the day, their work. And the end is the Torah. They always know that, even when they're working. Now he's just adding that in the study of Torah itself, not just between scholars and lay people, in lay people itself, you have two types. You have a lay person who are shayachim, they're more attuned to studying Torah, and there they also need to establish more permanence in time, not just in spirit. Then there's the person who's not really fundamentally connected or capable of really studying Torah. Nevertheless, he too has to study, because everybody's responsible to study, because that's his mitzvah. The only thing is, he fulfills the mitzvah through one chapter in the morning, one chapter at night. And such a person, for him, what do the sages say? Make it permanent. It means make it a permanent in your spirit, benefesh, in your spirit. So we have people who actually can learn all day. So you see that's one distinction. Another one, people who work all day, but they also can put more time to studying because they appreciate it and relate it. And the rest of people who may not appreciate it, for them, their designated is not so much the time, but in quality. They have to know this is in their spirit. This is a primary thing in their spirit. Like the Alter Rebbe writes in the laws of Talmud Torah, of teaching Torah, chapter 3. So there's no difference we see between the responsibility of studying, of exerting yourself in Torah, and someone who and someone who's responsible to do mitzvahs. So we see there's a fundamental difference. In mitzvahs, as he's going to say now, he just said, mitzvahs is the equalizer. It's God's will. And you shouldn't be weighing the two. In Torah, there's a distinction of how many hours you put in, and the differences that he just described. Between a scholar, a layperson who's capable of studying, a layperson who's not so capable. Okay?
It's not clear the different obligation between the two different lay people, the one with more appreciation, the one with
one more appreciation has to make more time. It's not enough just to do,
But the other one has to still study a chapter in the morning.
And still sense that it's a primary part of his life.
And the one with appreciation has to do even more.
More than a chapter. Exactly. Okay, so we see the difference in Torah and mitzvahs. And the kol zeh b'Torah u'mitzvahs, she'aTorah b'chinas chachma. And all this, the Torah mitzvahs, because the Torah comes from the level of wisdom. Sheyesh b'zeh madreigas chilukim. Wisdom has a distinction of levels. V'amitzvahs hein rotzna elyon. Remember we talked about the faculties. The faculties, chachma is a faculty. A faculty is a fundamentally internal energy that's made up of levels. But mitzvahs come from the higher desire, the supernal desire. There's no distinction of levels. And now he's going back. Remember, he began before Torah mitzvahs. He said it was the difference between the kavanah, doing the mitzvah, the action, and the intent, the reason for it. So now he's going back. In mitzvahs itself, this is the difference. But pratis who are mitzvahs atzman hafish ben kavanas mitzvahs. There's the intention in the mitzvah, the etzem kiyum mitzvah, compared to the fundamental, the actual doing the mitzvah, mitzvah shabehem, because of the will, because of God's will in it. Like I mentioned, the difference between the plumbers and the electricians. Their job is different. Their function is different. So from the perspective of the desire of the architect, of the builder, they're all equal. Everyone has to do their job. But from the perspective of understanding the details in action, they're very different. And that's why every mitzvah you have to have two intentions. One is within the specific intention, and the second is a sense of awe of heaven, that you're there to serve God's will, fulfill His will, and to serve Him in all the different ways that a servant serves a master. Like he says in Tanya, chapter 41. Okay, so basically what he did was apply the concept that he's been talking about, internal energy, as opposed to permeating energy, as opposed to encompassing or transcendent energy, the makiv, that one is an equalizer. Everything is equal. Remember, as we said, will doesn't have a particular faculty, a particular container in which it rests. Wisdom, on the other hand, does have a particular container. So Torah comes from wisdom, so it's very distinct and unique to each individual. Like you said before, wisdom breaks it down into details, and and each detail is different, and so on. On the other hand, will and desire doesn't break into details; it's an equalizer. So mitzvahs have to be done like without equalization. Now he explains that in mitzvahs itself, you have also two things: the wisdom within mitzvahs, which distinguishes one from the next, and there the intention is different, and the action within mitzvahs, which originates from the will of the divine, and that's an equalizer. And that's why you have to have these two intentions in the mitzvah. Now he's going to just conclude and say, he's basically explaining something that's a little perplexed. We see in most of the mitzvahs in the Torah concludes and says, I am your God. Why does it add, I am your God? It's seemingly not understandable. What is this concluding statement? What is this, the closure in each prayer that I am God? However, the answer is, the mitzvahs that are dependent on the letter Yud is Yud Yeshreis Hey. And there are mitzvahs that are connected to the letter Hey. Remember, Yud Ke Vav Ke is made up of four letters, right? A Yud, which is like a dot, a Hey, which is like a box with a left leg, and a space between the left leg, a Vav, which is a line, right? The transmission, and a final Hey, which is again the box. He's basically saying that a mitzvahs, and he's answering the question, what is this ani havaya? So he's saying the mitzvahs, the intention of mitzvahs also have two. I'm sorry. That within mitzvahs there are two things. One is the kavanah, which is the intention, which means looking for the mitzvah, how they're dependent on the names, the letters of Yud Ke Vav Ke. The mitzvah is connected to Yud, the mitzvah is connected to Hey. And when we say, I am your God, you're saying, this is the essence of the divine infinite light that's higher from the four letters that are connected in the letter Havaya, Yud Ke Vav Ke. From this perspective, from this level, there's no distinction between any levels at all. And that's why we conclude each of these mitzvahs by saying, I am your God. Why? That even though Torah has distinct levels, like we learned before, in the secrets and the reasons for the mitzvahs, nevertheless, do not sit and measure different mitzvahs, as we said before. Because I am your God, the essence of the divine radiates in the name of Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei. And this is the level of the supernal will that's higher than Chachma. And from this perspective, from this level, there's no difference at all. So basically what he's saying is as follows. That mitzvahs is a general uniting force, which is that's the divine desire, divine will. Okay. But the kavanah so each mitzvah has its particular personality. Some are dependent on the letter Yud, some on the letter Hey. But then there's an aspect, I am your God, that's beyond the distinction between one and the next. And that's why we say, we conclude, I am your God. That even though there's differences in the reasons and the secrets of the mitzvahs, but remember, I am your God in all of them. And that's the equalizer. And that is the equalizer. Even in the Shem Havaya, even in the letters where there's the distinction between one and the next, there's the desire is equal, that equalizes them all, that's higher than wisdom. The mitzvah lo yesh chilukim madregas klal. On this level, there's no difference. The klolos ha'inyan, and the general idea of this is that eres v'akecha shaboim b'chinas pnimi, that the energies and the faculties that manifest in an internal way, harehim b'chinas hakbala. He's summing up the chapter now. They all manifest in a defined way. And that's why they're fundamentally diverse and distinct. And the same as they manifest in one another and as they manifest in the containers. They all have definition. And the same thing spiritually. In Torah and the intention of mitzvahs, yeshus chalkus, there's distinction between one and the next. But the will within mitzvahs there, that's an equalizer, there's no distinction. And that's I am your God, that the ani, the I, within the Yud Kei Vav Kei, the distinction, there's an equal. So even though this mitzvah accomplishing one thing, this mitzvah is another, always remember that there's the I that transcends the distinctions, and that's why you shouldn't be sitting and measuring one and comparing one to the next. Okay? This concludes chapter 4. And now I'll read the summary. And that's why the faculties fundamentally are defined, finite and distinct. And this is the reason there are differences in the intention of mitzvahs. However, the level of the will within the mitzvahs, there they are equalized. That's how it is in general, the difference between Torah and mitzvahs. That's why there's no comparison to the responsibility of studying Torah and to the responsibility of doing mitzvahs. That's why in doing a mitzvah, you have to have two kavanahs. And that's why it concludes in each chapter, Ani Havaya, the equalizer. So essentially what he did was apply the principle that he was talking about before, that the energy in the container is all joined in a defined, distinct way, he applied that now. And in contrast to what we learned about Rotzen, Keser, the crown, the Rotzen, which is higher than containers, so he's explaining that in practical. Mitzvahs fundamentally are higher than containers, the will. That's why don't measure. But they are distinct. They are distinct. This one comes from you, this one from hey, different mitzvahs. Torah also has the element of that everybody has to study, but there's distinction of how, at what times, and so on. Generally, Torah is more in the containers. Mitzvahs is the will and desire above it. But mitzvahs itself have two levels. There's the level of the doing the mitzvah because God wants you to do it. That doesn't have distinction. And then there's the level of each mitzvah has its personality, has its identity.
Particular kavanah.
Right. Particular, right, exactly, specific to this particular mitzvah. So we have here the map. This is the first discourse in the entire thing. We finished in chapter 4. We have in the map, and we see it now also in the Torah mitzvahs level in our serving God, not just an abstract concept of energy and container, but how it manifests in a practical way, how they work with each other, how they help train each other, how they help become partners in this work. The partnership being that the body and its needs has its definitions, the soul has its, and they meet in the context of both ways, like the intermediate interface. On one hand, there's the Torah, which is an equalizer, but I'm sorry, the mitzvahs is the will is the equalizer, and then distinguishes between one intention and the other, and the Torah is more of a distinct element because everyone's studying something. The Torah comes from wisdom, mitzvahs comes from desire and will. And we'll stop and conclude here. That's chapter 4, the end of Discourse 1, page 8.